August 2012. I walked 11 acres of paste tomatoes and watched them die. Not from neglect, from the opposite. I had drip tape running through every row, pressure regulators, inline filters, timers I'd set before sunup. The water was running. The lines were full. The plants still curled and dropped and turned the color of old paper. That was the summer I stopped trying to solve a water problem. Because I didn't have a water problem. I had a soil problem. And everything I'd built, every foot of mainline, every drip emitter, every amended raised bed, was expensive infrastructure sitting on top of a design that was broken before I ever planted the first seed. My name is James Calloway. I've been farming 47 acres in Virginia's Shenandoah Valley for 23 years. Paste tomatoes, sweet peppers, winter squash, and dry beans, mostly regional markets, and a CSA that's kept us honest about quality. I've drilled 2 wells on this property, lost crops to drought, to late-season heat, to my own overconfidence. I've spent more money on irrigation infrastructure than I'll say out loud. 7 years ago, I started pulling drip tape out of the ground. Today, we irrigate fewer than 4 acres of this whole farm. The rest grows on rainfall. Here's what changed. Let me describe what most of you are doing right now. You water every 2 days, maybe every day in July. You've got drip lines, soaker hoses, a timer you replace the battery on every spring. You've added compost, built raised beds. Someone told you amended soil holds moisture better, so you amended it. And the soil still dries out. You come home after 2 days away, and the tomatoes are wilting. You run the hose. They recover. You do it again in 48 hours. I did this for the first 12 years on this property. 12 years running mainline and laterals across 40 acres. Pressure regulators, drip tape through every row, the whole system. And when it worked, it was fine. When a line blew in a dry August, when the well pressure dropped, when I drove away for a long weekend, I lost crop. Every time. The whole system collapsed because the whole system depended on me showing up. Here's the part nobody told me. My irrigation schedule was training my plants to be helpless. Every time I delivered water from above on a fixed schedule, the roots stayed shallow. 2 inches down, maybe 4. They had no reason to go deeper because the water kept coming to the surface, and shallow roots dry out the moment you miss a day. They can't reach the moisture sitting 8, 10, 12 inches down where the real reserves are. I watered that dependency into the soil, season after season. I built it. Then I maintained it with equipment and time and a water bill that climbed every dry summer. A typical backyard garden runs 1,500 to 2,000 gallons a month in summer. At average municipal rates, that's $50 to $80 a month. Add equipment, soaker hoses that clog, emitters that fail, timers that need replacing. Add the time. 30 hours a season minimum just managing irrigation. On my scale, the numbers get bigger, but the math is the same. I was spending real money and real hours maintaining a system built on a flaw I hadn't named yet. And then drought hits. Your municipality announces watering restrictions. Your well pressure drops. You go on vacation. And the whole thing fails because the whole thing requires you to keep showing up with water from somewhere else. Take yourself out of the equation and the crops die. That's not farming. That's water delivery. The summer of 2012 was the summer I finally understood that. Here's what took me too long to figure out. Most properties receive enough annual rainfall to grow food without supplemental irrigation. The problem is not rainfall volume. The problem is soil that can't hold what falls on it. Rain hits the surface. It runs off. It evaporates. What doesn't run off dries out within 48 hours. Your soil has no memory. It receives water and immediately loses it. You fill it back up. It loses it again. The cycle continues because the design never changes. This is a design problem, not a drought problem, not a climate problem, a design problem. I started reading about Japanese dry farming practices about 9 years ago. Farmers in drought-prone regions of Honshu and Kyushu, in Nagano, in Shizuoka, in Niigata, had been growing food without irrigation for 3,000 years. Same summer heat patterns as Virginia. Same dry spells in July and August. Same rainfall deficits. Different soil. different results. They watched rain fall on their fields over generations. They watched which plots stayed moist for 2 weeks after a single storm, and which plots dried out in 3 days. They asked why. The answer wasn't luck. The answer was soil structure, soil cover, and root architecture. They built soil that catches rain and holds it deep. They built soil memory. What they developed isn't complicated. 4 integrated elements. When you stack them, your soil becomes a reservoir. I'm going to walk you through each one. The first element is deep mulch retention. Traditional Japanese dry farmers maintain 4 to 6 inches of organic mulch across every bed at all times. Not a decorative inch, not a light scatter of straw. A dense, continuous blanket of rice husks, dried leaves, chopped plant material, laid thick and kept thick all season. That mulch does 3 things simultaneously. It blocks evaporation. Bare soil loses up to 70% of its surface moisture within 24 hours of rain. Mulched soil loses almost none. It insulates the surface, keeping it cooler in summer heat, cutting the temperature-driven moisture loss that kills shallow roots in dry spells. And it feeds soil biology from above. Worms and microbes break it down from below, building a crumbly, eye-porous structure that absorbs rainfall fast and holds it deep instead of shedding it off the surface. The first beds I converted on this farm were the ones that showed results first. A wet May 2 years ago, and those beds were still workably moist in late July without a single irrigation event. I've seen that pattern hold for 5 consecutive seasons on the oldest converted beds. Cost, 0 if you have garden waste, straw, or dried leaves. 1 afternoon to lay a full bed. After that, the system maintains itself. The second element is no-till root architecture, and this one is the hardest for people to stop doing, because it means quitting something we were taught. Every time you run a tiller, you destroy the mycelial networks running through your soil. Fungal threads that act as a biological water distribution system. They move moisture from saturated zones to dry zones. They connect roots to water sources 8-12 inches below the surface. A single square foot of healthy, undisturbed soil contains miles of these threads. One pass with a rototiller wipes them out completely. You start over every spring. I tilled this ground for the first 8 years. Every spring, I'd turn it, work in compost, plant into a fluffy seed bed. It looked right. It felt productive. I was resetting my soil's biology every single time. The oldest no-till beds on this property haven't been turned in 11 years. I've cracked those beds open beside a growing plant mid-July and found dark, crumbly, moist earth 8 inches down after 3 weeks without rain. That moisture didn't come from a hose. It came from the soil's own biology doing work I'd been destroying every spring for nearly a decade. No-till doesn't mean no soil preparation. You plant into undisturbed ground with a dibber or transplanting tool. You top dress with compost without inverting it. The biology incorporates it from below. The soil improves every season you leave it alone. Cost, 0. You stop spending time and fuel doing something that was setting you back. The third element is companion water cycling plants. And these aren't companions in the decorative sense. They're infrastructure. Deep-rooted plants function as biological pumps. Comfrey sends roots 3 to 5 feet into subsoil, pulling moisture up through its root system and releasing it into the microclimate around your crops. Daikon radish drills through compacted soil, and opening channels for rain to move down into deeper layers. Burdock does the same. They move water vertically through zones your surface irrigation never reaches. 8 years ago, I planted comfrey along the edges of 12 beds on this farm. Those original plants are still there. Their root systems are deeper now than I can dig. The beds they border hold moisture measurably longer than the unbordered beds during the same dry stretches. I stopped thinking of them as plants. They're part of the soil system. Plant them once along bed edges or between crop rows. They come back every season. They drill deeper every year. The system improves while they grow. Cost: 1 seed packet per type. $10, maybe $15 total. 1 afternoon. After that, they work indefinitely on their own. The fourth element is rain harvesting bed geometry. It's the simplest change, and the one most people haven't considered. Traditional Japanese farmers shape planting rows with a slight inward curve, broad and shallow, so the center of the bed sits fractionally lower than the edges. Rain that falls on the bed channels inward toward the root zone instead of running off the sides. On a flat bed, rainfall spreads outward and sheds. On a curved bed, it pools inward, directly over the roots, exactly where it needs to go. On sloped land, contour planting does the same thing at a larger scale. You're not building terraces. You're shaping the surface of existing beds to catch what falls on them. 10 minutes per bed with a hoe. You do it once a season. A small change in geometry means significantly more of every rainfall event stays in the root zone. When you stack all 4 elements, the numbers change in ways that are hard to argue with. Research on mulched no-till beds consistently shows soil moisture retention 3 times higher than tilled, unmulched beds under identical rainfall conditions. 3 times longer before the soil dries out. Documented Japanese dry farming plots in Shizuoka and Nagano show crop yields comparable to irrigated neighboring fields during the same dry summer periods. Not reduced, comparable, without a single irrigation event. On this farm, the shift was gradual and then sudden. Year 1 of converting a bed. I noticed I could skip waterings I'd been running out of habit, not necessity. Year 2. Those beds carried through a 2-week dry spell in August on stored soil moisture alone. Year 4. I pulled the drip tape entirely from the converted sections. But Year 7. 43 of 47 acres grow on rainfall. My water costs dropped by roughly $4,000 a year. The 30-plus hours a season I used to spend managing irrigation goes to other work. Last July, there was a drought advisory in effect for this county. Neighbors were running irrigation around the clock. I walked my converted beds at the end of the second dry week and pushed a finger 4 inches into the soil beside a paste tomato. Still moist. Dark. The kind of earth that holds together when you press it. That wasn't luck. That was the system working. Here's where you begin. And I mean this week, not next season. Pick one bed. 1. Lay 4 to 6 inches of straw or dried leaves across the whole surface. Don't till it first. Plant directly into the mulched bed with a dibber or transplanting tool. A water wants to establish. Then push your finger 2 inches into the soil before you water again. If it's still moist, skip it. That skip, that moment where you would have watered out of habit and don't, that's the first signal the system is working. In the second month, plant comfrey or daikon along the bed edges. Shape the surface with a slight inward curve using a hoe. Watch how the soil responds to the next rain. Month 3, you'll skip a full week of irrigation during a dry stretch and find the soil still workably moist at 4 inches. You'll realize you've been watering out of schedule, not out of need, for years. Month 6, that bed runs on rainfall. Under $10, one afternoon. The rest is patience and observation, which is really all farming has ever been. What Japanese farmers understood, and what took me 12 years in a dead 11-acre tomato field to accept, is that water isn't scarce. It falls from the sky, every season. Enough of it. The problem is you built soil that can't keep it. You built crops that can't find it. You built a system that sends you outside with a hose 3 times a week to compensate for both failures. I did the same thing for over a decade and called it good farming. Stop solving a water problem you don't have. Build soil that holds rain for weeks. One bed. This season. The soil does the rest.